So this is Battle Above the Clouds, and I've had this on the table here for a couple weeks now. I went ahead and did a reset of the campaign. This is the Chickamauga campaign. I should clarify, there's two campaigns. One is the Chickamauga campaign, and the other is Grant's Relief of the Siege of Chattanooga campaign, which would include Missionary Ridge and the Battle Above the Clouds, etc. So this one here, the Union Army is under the command of Rosecrans, and the Confederate Army is under Braxton Bragg. And the game really involves Braxton Bragg trying to delay the advance of the Union host while collecting his own resources in order to strike a mortal counterblow, which is what happened along the Chickamauga Creek historically. In my game, the Union, what I opted to do, I'm using the historic setup. If you're playing multiplayer, there is a hidden setup sequence that allows for a lot of variability in how the campaign will unfold. It's really cool, actually. I'm just using the historic setup because it works better for solitaire play. And so what I ended up doing was bringing all of the Union Army across the Tennessee River, which is a formidable military barrier in the game. There's only one bridge. It's blown, and so you have to build pontoon bridges, and that's time consuming. But I've established for the Union two bridges over the Tennessee River, and so I sent the corps that starts up on this part of the map. I can't remember the name of the commander. Is it Crittenden? I think it's Crittenden. Double checking, it is Crittenden. So I sent Crittenden's corps, rather than sending him over, this way and trying to force a crossing on the Tennessee River to the north of Chattanooga. Instead, I sent them down to the bend in the river and crossed them over. And so I've got Thomas's corps, Crittenden's corps, and McCook's corps of the Union Army, and they have approached and finally cleared Lookout Mountain. This is a formidable military obstacle as well, and Bragg's army was holding it pretty well. The problem was the Confederate cavalry suffered a couple of defeats in skirmishes with Union cavalry. So far, Union cavalry has been pretty effective at picking away at the Confederates. Now, the Confederates have Joe Wheeler on hand, so that's turned, at least there's better leadership now for the Confederates. But the bottom line is that Bragg doesn't have enough troops, and so by clever maneuvering, the Union has been able to basically leverage the Confederate forces out of strong positions, and a little bit of a disaster took place right here in one of the passes of Lookout Mountain. One of the approaches up the slope here, the two of the divisions under Thomas actually really demoralized and wrecked a brigade, or excuse me, a division under Breckinridge, part of, I think, D.H. Hill's corps. Yeah, that's one of Hill's corps. And so the result of that is now Thomas's corps has been concentrated, and they've cleared the gaps of Lookout Mountain, and they've formed a position in between two halves of Bragg's army. Bragg has Walker's corps and part of Polk's corps here, and then D.H. Hill and part of Polk's corps is located here. And in the middle, there's only a small cavalry screen and the wrecked division under Breckinridge. Forrest has been up here keeping a small Union lodgment at bay across the Tennessee River, but this is more or less a feint. But Forrest is probably going to have to cut loose of that and come down and help things out. The position in Chattanooga is now completely untenable, with Crittenden arriving here and able to march right in at his leisure. Now, Crittenden's corps did suffer a repulse, a pretty bloody repulse, at the hand of, who was that? Windman under Polk. Gave him a pretty bloody nose. And so that, that little setback there kind of helps to keep the Union honest. They'd had a pretty heavy string of wins up until that point. Over on this front, to the south here, Walker's corps had set up a nasty attack. It looked like they might turn the tables on the Union using Walker's corps and part of Polk's corps, and basically cut up one or two of the divisions under McCook. They had them trapped, and unfortunately for the Confederates, that attack did not come off. There's a lot of uncertainty in the game. When you go into attacks with multiple units, not everybody ends up joining in, and so the more complicated you try to set up the attack, the more likely it is that part of it's not going to happen the way you intend. And that's a pretty good representation of the history of this period. So what we've got now is we're just starting, I think, turn, 4, 8, 9, 10, 11, turn 11 of 40. So we're about a quarter of the way through the campaign. And so the Union has already taken care of its, it won the initiative for the turn. First thing we do is we check for random events and reinforcements, leadership transfers from the strategic map can take place. I should mention over here on the strategic map, I'm a little reluctant to pull, who we got here, Buckner. Buckner's corps is in this force here. There's a number of divisions. There's a division under Buckner and some artillery reserve. There's another division down here. I'm unwilling to concede Knoxville just yet for the Confederacy, and here's why. We're finally getting some reinforcements from Virginia. Longstreet is going to be bringing down Kershaw and Law. And Law's brigade's going to be showing up in 1, 2, 3, 4 more turns, but he's going to be showing up down here on the strategic map. So they really need to hold this railroad open if at all possible. So what we're trying to do here on this map as the Confederacy is form a screen, try to slow the Union down, form another good defensive line, and await these reinforcements with which we can strike a counterblow, as happened historically. But so far, the Union's been making pretty good progress. They are going to start running into some supply difficulties. So back to what I'm doing here. I'm going ahead and I'm going to do a leadership activation. You can activate a single unit, or you can activate a leader and then units that are under the command of that leader within a 3-hex radius. Unoccupied enemy zones of control will block that 3-hex radius. So what we've got here is I'm going to activate McCook, and basically I'm going to activate his whole corps. So once we've chosen the activation and selected and committed to these units here, what we're going to do next is we're going to roll a die. We're going to take one die and we're going to roll the dice, add 1 to the result, and that's the number of movement points that each of those divisions of his corps will have. And we rolled really well. That's a 6, which becomes a 7. And there's no events that modify that right now. So we're going to go ahead and put the active leaders movement rating here at 7 on the track, and then put the active unit on top of that. That just kind of helps us, because as you start to move things, and especially if you engage in attacks which cost movement points to do, it's easy to lose count. And so this is a way to prevent that from happening. In activating each unit, they're going to undertake, or they're going to incur a fatigue point. So if they had a 1, they would go to a 2. If a 2, they would go to a 3, and so forth. When you move from fatigue 2 to fatigue 3, there's a chance, with the Union, at least a 33% chance, that the unit will become exhausted and be flipped to its white side here. As you can see, McCook's division under R.W. Johnson is on its exhausted side. Exhausted units will be flipped back over to their unexhausted side if at the end of the turn in the recovery phase they either have 0 or only 1 fatigue on them. And the danger of keeping them exhausted is, as you march exhausted, the chances are higher that you'll end up having that unit go and become disorganized. Excuse me, I said that wrong. Let me go back and correct this. If you move from 2 to 3 fatigue points. Say he had, say this unit here has 2 fatigue points. He activates. Now he goes to 3. With the Union, it's 16% chance greater that they're going to incur some difficulties. And so you roll the dice on the extended march table, and there's a chance that your unit will be flipped over to its disorganized side. Now that is the strength marker underneath the unit. This guy's already disorganized, and his unit is exhausted. Exhaustion is tabulated at the end of the turn. If you have at least 3 fatigue on a unit, he's going to be marked as exhausted, which makes it more likely that their unit will become disorganized if you march with them too much. And if already disorganized, they can actually begin to lose strength points, which is a big deal. So we're going to have to be careful, in other words, with Johnson. I only want to move him one time this turn, because if I leave the end of the turn with him with 0 or 1 fatigue, then he will be able to recover both his exhaustion and his disorganized marker will be marked over to its organized side with a concurrent increase in strength. He'll go from 6 strength to 9 strength. So I don't want to do too much with him. Now, McCook is actually positioned with him. He's got a leadership rating of 3, or tactical rating of 3, and so he's positioned with him. But I'd like to put some pressure on Walker's corps, which is trying desperately to get down this road and get back to the center and be able to screen against Thomas. So to put pressure on him, here's what I'm going to do. This is not going to be a terribly aggressive move with 7 movement points, but I think what I'll go ahead and do is take this division, march him here, and stop. Now I could attack with him, but attacking across the creek, and before I activate a single division, I can actually transfer McCook to somebody under his command, but I'm not going to need to do that, and I'll show you why in just a second. I'm just going to march him there and put him in the ZOC. It's a good defensive location, but it's going to cost him an extra movement point to get out of that ZOC and march further. Plus, it sets up an opportunity, perhaps for one of Thomas's boys to come down and catch him in a flank attack and really hurt him. That basically compels the Confederates to try to move this guy next. Okay, he's done. I'm going to go ahead and take McCook here, this division, and go 1 up the road, 2 into the occupied hex. Because there is 3 or greater and less than 11 or less strength points. I want to make sure I actually say that correct. For the marching, I believe it is, yeah, if you have 3 to 11 strength points already in the hex, you have to add 1 more movement point. So he goes 1, 2, 3 of the 7 movement points, and he will be marked with fatigue as well. Usually when I get more than 1 division in a location, I'll use the force markers and put them on the display here so I can spread things out and see things a little bit more clearly. So they're done. Next, I'm going to take this division and we're going to have some fun with this guy. So we're going to march him down to here for 1, and I'll adjust on the track because this could get a little complicated. The next thing I'm going to do, since he's moved here, activation is going to pause. By the way, I should already mark him as soon as you go to move him, you mark him with fatigue. All right, let's go ahead and take this Confederate cavalry. And the danger here is that this infantry division has 9 points. That's a 9-to-1 attack if you start spending movement points to do an attack on the cavalry. The cavalry got to skedaddle. They got to get out of there. So what we're going to do is a cavalry retreat. And we're going to roll a die. We're going to modify it by -1 because it's a small force of cavalry, only 1 strength point. So we're going to roll a die, -1, have the result, round it down, and that's how many movement points that the infantry lose in the screening. So the result is a 5, which becomes a 4, which halved becomes 2. And so we come down here, and he's going to lose 1, 2 movement points. Now, he has to retreat 4 to 6 hexes, and his strength point is disorganized, and he picks up a fatigue marker. So he's going to back up 4 to 6 hexes, and there's a whole hierarchy on how to do this. I'm not going to take you through it. We're just going to go ahead and move him 4 to 6 back, and I happen to know in my mind what is legal here. So he's going to go 1, 2, 3, 4. We'll park him here. And that will be that. Now, if I had rolled a 1, anytime you roll an unmodified 1 in a cavalry retreat, they lose a strength point. So, there's a chance that they won't be able to skedaddle in time and they won't effectively screen the infantry advance. Well, this division here under Sheridan has 4 more movement points. So they could move up and try to clobber these guys and force them out. I don't want to lose too many points. I don't want to get him in a position where he's going to get cut up. I don't think there's really any threats in the way. What I really want to do, there is a force here. It's not too dangerous right now, but it could be. So I think what I'm going to do instead is take up a strong position where if this guy decides to come up the road, this guy can come around and really hurt him. I also don't want to leave this road open to the cavalry getting at my supply wagons, so I have to be a little cautious here. I don't want to leave a road unscreened by a Zoc. So I'm kind of thinking I'm just going to back up 1, 2. I don't need to do that. I could just go that way too. I think I'm going to park him there for the reason that he's guarding all of these hexes, at least from the cavalry till now. I want to bring Cook's cavalry down to screen those wagons. Then, so if I win a couple initiatives, I might be able to use him more effectively. I hate to waste his 4 movement points. He's got 2 more points to spend, but I think that's probably the best I can do. I think going up here might just be a little bit too reckless, because with some good die rolls, this cavalry could come back and really make a bad day for our supply wagons, or even this cavalry could swing around behind and cause some havoc. So I can't afford to lose those supply points as the Union. So we're gonna go ahead and just terminate the activation at that point, and that's the end of the activation. Next thing you do is you take your gray and your blue dice. Well, MMP has red and white dice, but I like the blue and the gray. So you roll them. High die will win the initiative. And Confederates win this one. So if it's a tie usually goes to the Confederates. In this game, there's a few exceptions to that I'm not going to get into in this video. Usually Confederates win the tie. If you win the initiative, you don't have to activate anything. You can choose to pass it to your opponent, but if both pass in sequence, that ends the turn, and then you go into the recovery phase when everybody loses their fatigue and everything. So with this, then I got to decide, okay, what am I going to do here? That was a great opportunity to get Walker and his boys out of there. And so we have some decisions to make, because it's a complicated grouping of units here. One of the things I can do in this game is I have a 50-50 chance of activating Bragg, and Bragg would be allowed to activate all these units within 3 hexes of him without respect to their actual command designation, which would be helpful because we have some intertwined units. We have some of Polk's Corps here in Force 3, and then we have Walker's Corps in Force 1 and in this hex. So it'd be a chance to get everybody out of here in one activation. But I really don't like those odds. So clunky as it may be, it might be the best move to go ahead and activate Walker first, because he's in the most exposed position, and start moving those guys out. So what we do with them is we'll activate Walker. We'll say we're activating Walker and everybody in Force 1. We won't worry about the activation. Well, I guess we could put him down. And then we're going to take 1 die, throw it. Oh, good move. That's exactly what the doctor ordered for the Confederacy. Now, their modifier is +2, so they got actually 8 points worth of movement, and that's going to be great because these guys are going to have to move through an occupied hex that has more than 11 strength points in it, so it's going to cost you 2 extra points to move through that. So basically, these guys can go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, get into a good position across that bridge, or even 7, 8, and get into here. We're trying to get on the far side of Chickamauga Creek is what we're trying to do here. So we'll be able to do that. I'm going to go ahead and close the video out at this point, but it gives you a sense of what's going on in this system. Some other video will look at maybe how combat is waged. One of the features of the game is that you have to spend movement points in order to engage in combat, and the more points you spend, the better the modifier you get in that combat situation. So you have to basically really plan out what you're going to do with your units, and it's one of those rare games where your movement is really dependent upon die rolls, and the best laid plans can get wrecked by a stubborn commander who doesn't do what you want them to do. Sounds like the American Civil War to me. So this is Battle Above the Clouds, great battles, or excuse me, great campaigns of the American Civil War system. Hope you enjoyed this video.